Charlie was a taxi driver who earned money by driving his cab. One day, he got ready to drive, even though it was raining heavily. Amanda stopped him, asking him not to drive in such heavy rain, but he didn't listen. Charlie sat in his cab, waiting for a client. At a bus stop nearby, he saw a man standing there who needed to go a little outside the city. The distance was quite far, but Charlie asked him to get in. The man sat in the cab and kept staring at Charlie. After a while, when Charlie looked back, there was no one there. Shocked and scared, Charlie suddenly noticed the same man approaching from behind the car. Terrified, Charlie pressed the accelerator and sped away, but the man was still chasing him, completely out of control. Eventually, Charlie lost control of the cab and crashed into a tree. When he woke up, he was in a hospital. The doctor told him that someone had saved him and brought him there. When Charlie looked at the person who had saved him, it was none other than the same man who had sat in his taxi. My name is Michael. Once my two friends, John and Carl, and I planned to go camping far away from the city. Both of them were very excited about the trip. We got in the car, with John driving. A short while later, we started hearing strange noises from the front tire. John got out to check it. When he didn't return after a while, Carl asked, "John, what's wrong with the tire?" There was no response. Carl stepped out of the car and looked around for John, but he wasn't there. Suddenly, a strange woman in white appeared in front of Carl. At first, Carl was frightened, but then he started smiling and followed her into the forest, as if he were under her control. I somehow managed to escape, but I lost both of my friends forever. My name is Jimmy. One day, my little brother and I were playing football in front of an abandoned mansion. Suddenly, my brother kicked the ball too hard, and it went inside through a window. My brother ran in to get it. A few moments later, I heard him screaming. I called my parents, and we all searched the mansion thoroughly. All we found was our football. There was no sign of my brother. When we asked the neighbors, they told us that many years ago, an old woman used to live alone in that mansion. After her death, her spirit became trapped inside, and it is said that to this day, she drags anyone who enters the mansion to their death. Daniel had recently moved to Sydney and got a night shift job at a railway station. He had no other options but to take the job. As he arrived, the day shift guard explained his duties and left. Daniel sat in the cabin, watching over the station. It was late at night, and the howling of wolves echoed around him. At around 3 a.m., he heard a sound outside his cabin. When he stepped out, there was a wolf standing right there. Terrified, Daniel quickly boarded a train that had just arrived. He sat next to a man who had his face covered. Daniel asked him, "Where is this train going?" The man, in a terrifying voice, replied, "Towards death." The next day, Daniel's missing report was published in the newspaper. Raj lived in a small village in India. In the middle of the village, there was a well that people believed was haunted by the spirit of a woman. One night, there was a knock at Raj's door. Wondering who it could be at such a late hour, he stepped outside and saw a woman in colorful clothes, with her face covered. Blood was dripping from her eyes. Period. Frightened, Raj tried to close the door, but the woman took control of him, and he began following her. She led him straight to the well. The next day, despite searching everywhere, the villagers couldn't find Raj. Ben was sitting in a cabin at the bus station. keeping an eye on the surroundings. He had just started a new job as a guard there. Dogs were barking all around when, suddenly, there was a knock on his cabin door. When Ben checked outside, no one was there. He sat back down, but then there was another knock. This time, when he opened the door, an old woman with burned clothes was standing there. She pushed Ben, sending him crashing to the ground. Just then, another guard arrived, and the woman disappeared instantly. The other guard explained that years ago, an old woman had died in an accident at the bus station, and her spirit still roamed there. Ben immediately quit the job, and even now, the memory of that old woman keeps him awake at night. It was around midnight. Sam was walking along a long, lonely road, with the sound of dogs barking echoing around him. He accidentally entered a narrow alley with a sign that read, "This alley is not safe." As he walked further, he felt like someone was following him. When he turned around, no one was there. Deciding to head back home, Sam noticed he was walking in circles, ending up at the same place repeatedly. Suddenly, a tall figure appeared and attacked him, throwing him across the road. Just then, a car arrived, and the figure vanished instantly. Sam survived that night, but the memory of that terrifying figure still haunts his sleep. Mike had recently moved to Tokyo with his parents. Their house was in a village far from the city, with very few homes and just one old park nearby. One day, Mike went to the park with his parents. It looked abandoned, and apart from Mike, no one else was there. While playing on the swings, Mike suddenly heard someone calling his name. He saw a strange man with red eyes staring at him. The man suddenly possessed Mike's body. After that day, Mike's behavior changed. He would scream at night and stop talking to anyone. One day, when his parents went into his room, Mike started acting like an animal before suddenly collapsing. They rushed him to the hospital, but it was too late. His body had stiffened, and he took his last breath. A few days later, another boy around Mike's age screamed in the same park. Thomas was going to celebrate his friend's birthday at a bakery far from the city, traveling down a deserted and dangerous road. After hours of driving, they finally reached the bakery, which was surrounded by trees and completely empty except for them. They sat at a table and ordered food. Thomas found the waiter strange. His clothes were stained with blood. Thomas told his friend he was going to the restroom. When he returned, his friend was gone. Suddenly, he heard his friend screaming from another room. When Thomas entered, his friend was lying on the ground covered in blood. Standing nearby were the same waiter and an old woman. Terrified, Thomas fled and called the police. When they arrived, the bakery was burned to the ground with no one inside. Later, Thomas learned that years ago, an old woman owned that bakery, but it caught fire one day, killing both her and a waiter. It's said their spirits still haunt the bakery, and no one who enters ever comes out alive. Far from the city, there was an abandoned mansion where people were too afraid to go. It was said that the spirit of a woman haunted the place. Unaware of these stories, Johnny and his 3 friends decided to explore the mansion. They told their parents they were going to the park and set off on their bikes toward the mansion. As soon as they entered, they felt like someone else was there with them. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, and they heard eerie laughter from afar. Terrified, they tried to find a way out but couldn't. Suddenly, a woman in white appeared and screamed loudly. The boys fell unconscious from fear. No one knows where those boys are now. if they're even alive.